My name is Tom Roser. I'm chairman of the City Club of Chicago. And I welcome you here. We're going to ask our speakers to take a place here at the panel table here. Please join us so we can start the program. Going to start off with Craig Johnson. But before we do, I want to point out that these people really deserve a lot of credit for their courage in withstanding the conventional wisdom and funding these unprecedented studies of the most complex and expensive airport project in the nation's history. Thanks to their commitment, the Federal Aviation Administration is becoming more and more aware of the technical and economic problems of this plan. Last week, the city expressed disappointment that it would have to spend millions more taxpayers' dollars for additional consulting, public relations, and other activities because the FAA has not conformed to the city's rushed schedule for breaking ground. Instead, the FAA is adhering to its detailed analysis as required, especially of a project of such national significance. So what are the merits of the technical objections to the O'Hare modernization program? The City Club heard the city make its case. Today we'll hear from the other side. The first speaker will be Craig Johnson, who has been Elk Grove Village Mayor since 1997, and before that served as village trustee in 1993. He is active on numerous boards and commissions in Northern Cook County, Solid Waste Agency, Joint Action Water Agency, and the Suburban O'Hare Commission, of which he is vice chair. He is the owner of Johnson Insurance Agency, located in Elk Grove Village, also a founding member and treasurer of the South Suburban Airport Commission. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you very much. First off, I'd like to thank the City Club for allowing us to come here today and to speak to you folks. You know, for a long time we felt like we've been kind of ignored and pushed aside by not only the city of Chicago but the business community, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk directly to the Chicago business community about an issue that is very important to all of us, whether you're the city or the suburbs or the entire region, if you want to look at it on the entirety of this project. Let me start by ending some rumors that fly out there, in particular about myself or Mayor Giles from Bensonville, who unfortunately could not be here today with us, and he sends his regrets. Elk Grove Village and Bensonville love O'Hare Airport. Now, you may not have heard that before, so I'm going to say it one more time. Elk Grove Village and Bensonville love O'Hare Airport. Our community is based on O'Hare Airport being strong and viable. Elk Grove Village is home to the nation's largest contiguous industrial park. Over 100,000 people, both full and part-time, work every day within our city limits. We got the second largest employment base outside the city of Chicago in the state of Illinois. 4,000 companies call Elk Grove Village their home, and they are vitally tied, and it's important to have a good O'Hare Airport. So we are not anti-O'Hare. We're very pro-O'Hare. But we also realize is that O'Hare needs to be modernized, just as Chicago says. We have a different perspective of how to modernize it, but we support the modernization of O'Hare. We support very strongly, and we're one of the first communities to endorse the western access to O'Hare. We've long said that it's vitally important to make sure the airport works not only for the airport in the city of Chicago, but for the suburbs to the west of the airport. So we support that. The question comes down is O'Hare expansion the best solution for not only our communities, the city of Chicago, but more importantly, for the region? Or is there a better solution that's out there? It basically comes down to two choices that face this region. Either you expand O'Hare Airport or you build a South Suburban airport, because the region needs more capacity. And those are the only two viable choices that exist. And that's not our words. That's every study that's been done since the mid-1980s, both by government and privately, has said the exact same thing. Our long view is O'Hare expansion does not work. And today you'll hear some of the reasons why it doesn't. It's going to be too costly. As you recently followed the media, you've seen where it went from $6 billion to $15 billion, a figure that we have long said is still low, but we've advocated, yet was chastised for being extremists, and now it's coming out at $15 billion. And yes, you may hear that, well, that's for the whole thing, including kitchen sink. Well, I've never bought a house without a kitchen sink. You want the whole thing done. You want the land side, the terminal, and the air side completed. It's like a three-legged stool. If you only do two legs, that stool is not going to stand very long. Or do you build a South Suburban airport that can be done, number one, privately, number two, meet the capacity needs for many years to come, and more importantly, that's long overlooked, give an economic engine to a region that needs an economic engine. And people have long said, well, gee, Mayor, if you build a South Suburban airport, Elk Grove's in trouble. No, we're not. We're going to do fine with South Suburban Airport. Every study's come out to say that. But where we are hurting is that the economic depression that has hit the south suburbs, while we've enjoyed the economic boom in the northwest suburbs, that affects us. James Houlihan, the assessor, is the one that told the Northwest Municipal Conference of Mayors that you're paying more in taxes up here in northwest suburbs to help carry the weight of the south suburbs. Well, it only makes sense if you give them an economic engine to build themselves up as we've built ourselves up. They can carry more of the fair share of the weight. And the other problem is called congestion. Biggest complaint I have from my businesses every day is congestion. Well, if you try to put that much more capacity, that much more passengers, that much more auxiliary needs to expand the airport on our roadway system that today is 30% above capacity at prime time, you're going to create such gridlock that our business is going to be flocking out of here, not flocking to come to our community. So we're looking at this as a regional solution. What's best? What's best for the south suburbs, what's best for the northwest suburbs, and what's best for the entire region, including the city of Chicago. And that's what we long advocated. It's funny because we've been accused of being the doomsayers, the naysayers. But what you're going to hear today from two distinguished gentlemen with impeccable credentials, well-respected in the industry, is kind of startling. It's completely opposite what you've been hearing from what we call the spin machine. And someday, if we don't stop what they want to do at O'Hare, that airport could become a white elephant. It could become the demise of the economic engine in northwest suburban, northwest Chicago area. But if we do what's right, someday they may be thanking these mayors in the suburban area for saving the region economically and having the foresight to do what's right for everyone. Everyone. And if we do what's right for everyone, we're all going to win. So I want to thank you very much for allowing us to come here today. I greatly appreciate it. And we've got two distinguished gentlemen, Joe DeBazzo and John Ash, who are going to be talking today. And we'll let Tom introduce them. Thank you very much.
Incidentally, on the question time, when the question time comes, we have this being taped on CAN TV, and so which is an access TV for Chicago and the suburbs, and when you ask the questions, stand at that microphone there and identify yourselves. And I'll announce later on when this will appear on television. Joseph M. Del Balzo is the president of JDA Aviation Technology Solutions, a company offering an array of services, including airport and airspace planning to aviation clients. He previously served as acting administrator and deputy administrator, the highest administrative position in the FAA of the Federal Aviation Administration. He also served as FAA's executive director of system operations, where his leadership included the definition of requirements for new technology, installing, operating, maintaining all air traffic control systems and facilities, and developing and overseeing safety regulations for all aircraft, airline, and airmen in the U.S. system. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and an instrument-rated pilot. Joe?
Tom, thank you very much. Now, let me start by telling you that I have been involved in objectively analyzing the city's plans to expand O'Hare Airport for about 15 months now, 15, 17 months. I got involved on one condition with the mayors, and the condition was we're going to do an objective analysis. We will call it the way we see it. We'll tell you what we like. We'll tell you what we don't like. To their credit, they said, let's do that, and they took a risk with us. So let me tell you what our findings are. Over the past 15 months, I've led a team. You all know what the expansion plan is all about. It's building a new airport on top of the existing airport. And we looked at the city's original claims. The city's original claims were this plan would increase capacity from 900,000 to 1.6 million flights a year. It would reduce delays by 79%. It would reduce weather delays by 95%. It would handle 40 million more passengers a year. It would increase safety. It could be done at a cost of $6.6 billion. It wouldn't require any local or state taxpayer money, and it would save the airlines $370 million in delay costs. Now, we didn't have very much to go on other than promotional material issued by the city at that time. But based on our experience, we quickly concluded that this can't happen. But if you say it fast, how great it sounds. Increase capacity, handle more passengers, reduce delays, increase safety, no cost to the taxpayer, save airlines lots of money. So you ask yourself, so what's not to like? Sounds pretty good. We took a step back and we looked at the claims one at a time. One more. So let's start. And we start with the city's claim to increase capacity to 1.6 million flights a year. We quickly concluded that you can't do that. A couple of months after we reached that conclusion, the city's consultant reached the same conclusion. You can't handle 1.6 million operations a year at O'Hare. The city consultant went one step further and said the airport becomes gridlocked at 1.3 million operations a year. They did that in December 2002. A couple of months ago, the city changed that claim again and said we'll handle 1.2 million operations a year. We look at that, and now we have studies that we can evaluate, and we conclude that you can't do 1.2 million operations a year. And the reason you can't do 1.2 million operations a year is because the assumptions that were used to reach that number are wrong. Assumption number one has to do with airspace congestion. The city assumes that O'Hare Airport is an island unto itself and there are no other airplanes in the airspace. Wrong. The airspace in and around O'Hare is some of the most congested airspace in the country. O'Hare, Midway, DuPage County, Milwaukee. Every day what you have are lots of airplanes climbing and descending, overflying to the west, overflying to the east, using the same jet routes as the aircraft that are operating into O'Hare. Causes traffic to be delayed at peak arrival and departure times. You can't do an analysis of capacity delay benefits without ignoring airspace congestion. Major problem. In December 2002, we reached the conclusion that there was another major wrong assumption. And it was a wrong assumption having to do with weather and what you could do with the closely spaced parallel runways during bad weather conditions. We pointed that out, and I would say to the city's credit, to their consultants' credit, they recently redid their simulation. They took into account the mistakes that we pointed out, and they redid it with the right weather assumptions. But oddly enough, they come out with the same conclusion regarding delay and capacity benefits. And the way they reach that conclusion is they adjust the parameters that they use in their simulation. So what they wind up doing is reducing separation standards from 3 miles to 2.5 miles to compensate for the bad weather assumptions that was made in the original study. Third mistake, you know that this new plan does away with a crosswind runway. The consultant does not take into account the percentage of time that the crosswind component will exceed limits and actually force O'Hare Airport to shut down. Now, it doesn't happen very often, probably happens 2% of the time under ideal conditions when airplanes can't land at O'Hare Airport without that crosswind runway. But you've got to go back and redo that calculation. And the other thing that happens in the city's analysis, they simply ignore reality. They assume that everything works perfectly. They assume that there will never be a summer thunderstorm. They assume that there will never be a crosswind runway that will shut the airport down. They assume that pilots and controllers always operate at optimum performance. They assume that there will never be a go-around on final approach. They assume that the winds will never change, forcing a change in airfield configuration. They assume that in spite of the closely spaced parallel runways and the operational restrictions that FAA has placed on the airport, they assume that those restrictions will never take place. So when you go back, redo a calculation, our conclusion is that 1 million operations a year is much more reasonable than the city is now predicting. 1.1 million operations a year, that's 200,000 more than is being accomplished today. So hold that thought, 200,000 more operations a year. City claim number 2, the expansion can handle 40 million more passengers a year. That claim is based on 1.6 million flights a year. You now know that you can't do 1.6, you can't do 1.3. We don't believe you can do 1.2. You can do 1.1 million at best. You'll come nowhere near handling 40 million more passengers a year. City claim 3, we're going to reduce overall delays by 79%. Flawed assumptions. The city actually admits to an increase in overall average delays at 1.3 million operations a year. And during very bad weather, you have intolerable delays, delays that are much higher than the delays being experienced today. And when you recalculate with the correct assumptions, those delays will get even higher. What happens is the capacity of the airport decreases, but the airport is expected to handle more flights. Airlines schedule for good weather capacity. When the weather turns bad, you'll have that many more aircraft that are in the queue, that many more delayed flights. City claim number 4 is that they will reduce weather-related delays by 95%. And again, that's based on the bad assumptions. An assumption that says weather delays are only caused by an insufficient number of runways. Well, that's not true. I mean, I'm sure that there are many times when a lot of you are on an airplane, sitting on the ramp, the weather is good, and yet you're told that there's a delay because of weather. It has nothing to do with the number of runways at O'Hare Airport. It has to do with what's happening around the country. So there are a number of delays that have nothing to do with the number of runways It either has to do with airspace congestion or it has to do with weather in different parts of the country. You're not going to reduce weather-related delays. We're on to City Claim 5. City says we can do all of this with increased safety. This is a very serious point. Not only can't you implement the city's plan increasing safety, you can't implement this plan and maintain safety. You'll wind implementing a plan that will make O'Hare Airport less safe than it is today. And that's an issue that no one here should take very lightly. Let me go through some of the points. I say too many airplanes. Back in 1993, FAA, I know because I was there. I probably signed the letter, I don't remember. But I'll tell you what the letter says. What the letter says is that when the number of operations per year at O'Hare Airport approach 900 to 950,000, we become very worried about operational errors. Operational errors occur when a controller makes a mistake and airplanes get too close together. Well, guess what? We're running about 950,000 operations a year today at O'Hare. And you may have read what's happened with operational errors. Operational errors have increased at the tower, at the TRACON, and at the Air Traffic Control Center. A couple of examples. As recently as December 9th, wrong turn by a pilot brought a Mexicana airplane on a head-on collision course with a United Airlines flight, 1 mile apart, closing at 500 miles per hour. You got a couple of seconds to avoid a collision. Next day, December 10th, 2 planes landing on parallel runways come within 2.5 miles of each other. Doesn't sound like that's very close, but at the closure rates, you don't want to be on those airplanes. There's an increased potential for runway incursions. Runway incursions are related to the number of times you have to cross an active runway or an active taxiway. Well, if you look at the city's analysis, you find that the number of taxiway runway crossings today, each day, is about 144. Under the new plan, starts at 256 at today's level of traffic, increases to 428, increases again to 629. And the analysis says, well, not to worry. Look at Dallas-Fort Worth, look at Atlanta. They have a lot more crossings than that. You can't compare O'Hare to Dallas-Fort Worth or Atlanta. Different weather conditions, different traffic conditions, different geographical footprint of the airport. So don't be misled when someone tries to compare what's happening at O'Hare to another airport in the United States. It doesn't work. The loss of the critical crosswind runway capability. O'Hare would be the only major airport in the northern tier that doesn't have a crosswind runway. Look at Minneapolis, look at Detroit, crosswind runways. We did a focus group meeting with pilots that operate into and out of O'Hare. We did another focus group meeting with air traffic controllers that control traffic at O'Hare Airport. They felt that the loss of the crosswind runway was critical, from a safety standpoint, unacceptable. Let me give you an excerpt from a NATCA letter on the crosswind runway issue. During winter, it is common to have strong winds out of the northwest with snow, cold temperatures, and icy conditions. During these times, it's critical to have runways that point as closely as possible into the wind. This is a safety issue. This is from the people that have to operate the expanded O'Hare plan. One of the things that the city doesn't talk about, the city always focuses on all of the good things that they claim will happen 10 years after construction starts, when the plan is completed. What they don't talk about is the 10-year construction period. During the 10 years, you're going to have changing runways, changing taxiway configurations, changing signs, changing lighting, changing marking on the airport, changing air traffic control procedures. This construction is going to take place at night when the hazards are the least visible. You know that this airport is used a lot by foreign carriers that visit the airport a few times a month. They're not going to be familiar with all of these changes. Pilots and controllers, constant state of confusion. You don't think that's important? I go back to October 2000, Singapore Airlines, 747 airplane taking off at Taipei. At night, marginal weather, took off from a closed runway, struck a barrier, airplane broke into 3 parts, went on fire, lots of fatalities. Why did that happen? It wasn't because the runway wasn't marked. It was because that runway was normally open, now closed for construction. Last time the pilot was in was an operational runway. 3 times in the last 3 years, a pilot has landed on a taxiway at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, mistakenly thinking that it was a runway that hasn't been built yet. That's what happens during the construction period. When you think about what the city is proposing to do, building a new airport on top of another airport, 10 years, you have an accident waiting to happen. And I predict if this plan goes through a 10-year construction period, that's exactly what's going to happen. City claims 6, no cost to the taxpayer. I mean, here's what we now know. The original cost estimate was $6.6 billion. That was underestimated. When we first looked at it, we said it was closer to $15 to $20 billion. When we look at it now, we think it's closer to $20 billion. The city's estimate for off-airport access, which is not included, is another $3.9 million. John Ash will talk about where the funding comes from, how it gets funded, if it can be funded, and whether or not you can count on FAA funding support at the levels required by the city. So now up to City Claim 7, save $370 million a year and delay cost. Well, it's obvious. Delays aren't going to decrease, they're going to increase. The debt service, you'll hear from John Ash, going to cost the airlines money, not save the airlines money. And he'll also tell you the airlines can't afford it. So now let's do it one more time. Say it slow. You've got a plan that doesn't increase capacity. You have a plan that can handle 40 million more passengers. You'll be lucky to do 10 million more passengers a year. You have a plan that actually increases delays, especially during bad weather. You have a plan that gives you inadequate safety margins, a plan that can't be financed, you'll hear that later, and a plan that doesn't save airlines any money at all. What you have is a plan that simply doesn't work. But I don't want to leave it at that. Okay, so the plan doesn't work. What do you do at O'Hare? I mean, there's no question that O'Hare needs to be improved. There's no question that the region needs additional capacity. So what do? You start by admitting this plan doesn't work. It's a scheme, it's not a plan. You admit it doesn't work, and you start from the top down. You form a partnership with FAA, a state and local partnership. You look at the needs of the air transportation system. You look at the regional needs, figure out the real needs of O'Hare based on the region needs. And you take a serious assessment of a report that was done and a study that was done led by the city of Chicago 2 years ago. And it's called a O'Hare Task Force report. It was done with FAA. It was done with all of the users of the airport. And it was led by the city, jointly with FAA. You know what they concluded? They concluded that you could do 47 things at the existing airport, and you could reach a capacity level of $1.24 million operations a year and never have to pour a cubic yard of concrete, all procedural. Well, what's happened to that? So you take a serious look at that, and you'll wind up with rational improvements at O'Hare, coupled with the building of a new airport. That's your solution for O'Hare. That's your solution for the region. And I now look at my watch, and I've made a mistake. I've made the same mistake that a student made in a class of Greek history. When the student was asked, what do you know about Socrates? The student says, I know he was Greek, I know he talked a lot, and they poisoned him.
John Ash is founder and managing director of Global Aviation Associates, a Washington, D.C. commercial aviation consulting firm. In the 1970s and 80s, he held various key executive positions at Trans World Airlines, providing leadership in financial analysis, budgeting, long-range planning, marketing, sales, airport operations, and governmental relations. Since founding his firm, he has directed the development and analysis of business plans, advised U.S. and foreign corporations on regulatory policy, developed strategic plans, economic and financial analyses for airports, air carriers, and vendors to the industry. He served on the boards of a number of aviation-related organizations. John?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I will try to move through this quickly. I know you've got some time constraints, so we'll be sure to get you out of here when we need to. What I'm going to do is try to cover some of the background to this program. Then I'll get into the program economics, which include traffic projections, capital requirements, financing assumptions, and the impact on costs and pricing. And then I'll talk a little bit about the city's economic impact study, which makes some pretty broad claims with respect to creation of economic impact and creation of jobs, and then draw some very quick conclusions. Let me start with the frame of reference that we're dealing with here. The city has basically an unconstrained demand forecast in terms of traffic that's going to occur over the next 10 or 12 years, and that'll go through the year 2012 here, and that forecast takes the city from the current 35 or so, actually it's about 34 million passengers, it was 35 a few years ago, up to a range of what the city claims would be 47 million by 46 million, 47 million, by 2012 grows to 57 million later. The problem today is you have this essentially unconstrained demand, and then you have here the capacity to handle the demand on this scale, and that's essentially about 450,000 departures, which is where you get to the 900 and some thousand operations. So that's the sort of challenge that you face. You got unconstrained demand, and you have no capacity, or you have, if you will, a lock, flat capacity. Now, let me put this in a little context. If you're going to expand capacity of an airport to gain throughput, which means more cargo moving, more passengers moving, more airplanes moving, somebody's got to pay for it. And the somebody ultimately is you in the shorter run. That somebody is the airlines. The problem here, very briefly, is the airlines in these last 3 or 4 years have managed to lose over $25 billion. That's with a B. And therefore, as you well know, the two key airlines that control about 80% of O'Hare, one is in bankruptcy, and the other avoided it at 11:59 p.m. at night. This gives you the sort of the demonstration of that control of the capacity, and basically you can see there's American Airlines with its 35% and United with its almost 50% of the capacity at O'Hare. So that's what's going to drive whether this OMP modernization plan moves or does not move. And again, if we now look more closely at their financial posture, what you see here is American from 2001 to 2003. You see United from 2001 to 2003. The combined total of the two of them have generated operating losses of $14.7 billion, which is almost 60% of the whole industry. So that's the backing for this kind of a program. Now, here is what the city is proposing, and here is how they're proposing to get it done. Essentially, the city is proposing to solve this capacity problem to meet the forecast demand, and they say they're going to do it for $6.6 billion. They're going to increase the employments to $47 billion, and where's that money going to come from for that $15 billion, what is $6 billion that they say, which in fact is $15 billion? It's going to come from something called federal AIP grant money, which has a cap of about $500 million a year in discretionary funding. They say it's going to come from passenger facility charges, from general airport revenue bonds, and from third-party financing. They also indicate that as of today, and we certainly agree with this, the cost per passenger to the airlines is about $9.24. That's pretty good. It's very competitive. The airline's total cost divided by the passengers they enplane is about $9. Very acceptable kind of number. The city says that'll grow to about 20 in the year 2012. And this is how the situation is going to be dealt with. Now, one of the problems is that a lot of the underlying data isn't there and we can't find it. But working with the data that we can find, and I'll just not tie you up with all of these massive kinds of numbers, but I'm just going to focus you on a couple that I think are critical. The enplanements that they are projecting, we project enplanements in the area of about 42 billion. They're talking 46. What that means is when you get to the end of the day, the passenger cost, we believe, will be in this area at least $26 a passenger, which is a totally unacceptable, non-competitive kind of a cost for airline to bear. And today's cost to revenue ratio of 5.4% will grow to 13.4%. Just not workable. The capital cost. City says the capital cost will be $6.6 billion. We have estimated it at $12.8 billion in terms of 2004 dollars, and we think it's around $15 billion, as best we can tell, in what would be nominal dollars. And one of the reasons you see the $6.6 billion is frankly, blue smoke and mirrors is, read the fine print, and what you'll see is that those are 2001 dollars. Other parts of the program are in 1999 dollars. So they are not in effect real dollars. Now, here is another sort of large challenge to this situation. The city claims that the sourcing of funds will be that federal grant program I mentioned. The discretionary funds will produce 9%. Passenger facility charges, which is the tax that you all pay, it's an enplanement tax, maxes at $4.50 a passenger today. And general airport revenue bonds, the city says will finance about 60%, and then third-party financing about 10%. Let me run through these quickly. The AIP discretionary pot is $500 million. The city's asked for $30 million a year. That's 6% of the total pot. They are never going to get more than 6% because if they do, it has to come from the rest of the country. The $500 million gets spread all over this country in all of the airports, and no city's going to get more federal funding than 6%. So the 9% isn't there. The fact of the matter is a $15 billion project, $30 million a year is 2%. Passenger facility charges. The funding is going to come, according to the city, because they're going to raise the PFC, as we call it, passenger facility charge. Your 450 is going to go to $6, according to the city. It is not. The airlines will fall on their swords before that fee is raised. It is legislatively mandated and capped at 450. That is not going to change in the foreseeable future. Look at the plight of the airlines. Congress is not going to do anything to increase their costs. So there's no funding there. And then let's look at third-party funding. That's going to be 10%. What that usually is special facility financing. And special facility financing means is if American wants to build its own terminal, it backs the terminal. Special facility financing may not be around the next 5 years because of the unique nature of certain court cases related to bankruptcies that have occurred recently that have brought into question the ability of the bondholders to collect on special facility financing. So where are you left? Not 60, general airport revenue bonds then would have to absorb not 60%, but 90%. So then the question is, can you really finance somewhere in a range of $13 billion? You know, can you really put together $13 billion in financing that ultimately have to get passed back to you, the consumer, because somebody has to finance and pay that principal and interest? Now, we took a look at some other options in some of the city's data with respect to how you'd pay for this kind of thing. The city says the cost to the airlines in 2012 is about $938 million. To make a long story short, with a couple of minor adjustments for reality, we think that's probably more in the magnitude of $1.1 billion. And that's not a big adjustment, as you could tell. Cities also overstated the growth potential because you can only get about 1.1 billion operations, even with the plan, aircraft operations, and as Joe has mentioned. So you're really looking at maybe 41 million enplanements per year. So what happens? Just with these minor adjustments, you have a 15% increase in cost, you have an 11.4% decrease in traffic, and all of a sudden, you got a 30% increase in the cost above that, which the city believes that it can, it believes it would have to charge to the airline. So instead of looking at that $20, we're really looking at $26. And that, in our view, is probably a real minimum. Even the city says by 2020, they're looking at a cost of $27. And they say $20 in 2012. Now, how do you raise airfares to cover all that cost? Briefly, low-cost carrier ASMs, that's the amount of capacity offered by the low-cost carriers. Look what's happened to it. And what does that produce? That produced ticket price decline. Ticket prices have gone from $178 on average down to $141. That's because of the growth of low-fare carriers at Midway. Lastly, the city claims that this program will produce new jobs, 195,000 new jobs, and $18 billion in economic value. We took a look at those numbers. If you look at this curve and look at all those airports, you can see the level of activity over here and the claim, versus their in-plane passengers. And what you see is a couple of things. One of which is that Atlanta over here, that in effect claims about 330 million jobs absolute level today, claims about 70% of the jobs that Chicago claims. And Chicago doesn't produce as much economic activity. So if you look at the curve and you see the economies of scale, you see not only does Chicago claim more than it really can produce today, but the curve is telling you there are economies of scale here because this is not linear, it's curved, and therefore the incremental jobs the city's claiming really aren't there either to anywhere near that magnitude. We look at the city's claim, we basically have concluded that the city is overstating the claims of economic benefit by 150%. In other words, our estimate is 65% below theirs, or the city, in effect, is overstated their claims by 150%, and in fact, we've been generous with their claims. Now, having said that, the fact is there are a lot of negatives that then grow out of this kind of a thing, which is unworkable, and they grow because you can't measure, for example, jobs destroyed by higher airfares. That's very difficult to do. What would happen is you raise the airfares to pay the debt on this $13 billion or $15 billion project. As you raise those airfares, fewer people travel out of O'Hare. Some go to Midway, some go by car, some don't go. Businessmen around the world, around the country, look at investing in the area, and they say no dice. So what do you end up with? You've got projected increases in traffic that are not attainable because of capacity. You got financing assumptions that make no sense. If the financing is there, the airline costs would almost triple, and then the projected economic impacts are massively overstated, in effect, ultimately could be negative because of the prices you've had to charge to your local community. The bottom line is this dog won't hunt. It may be a cute dog, but it won't hunt. Thank you.
Okay, if you have questions and comments, please go to the microphone. Chris Roebling.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Del Balzo, and thank you, Mr. Ash. I really want to ask Craig the first question, and that is, with due respect to our friends from the city and the state here, our friends at the city who, in this administration alone, had 4 different positions on increasing capacity in the Chicago Center, and our friends at the state who are learning about IDOT and the Department of Aviation within IDOT, aeronautics. Craig, I want to ask you if we don't really face a governance issue more than we face engineering issues. Because I think that this region has to look closely at how for 17 years we've danced around the facts that have been clear to every independent and objective observer about the capacity shortfall at O'Hare. And rather than crafting a regional solution that has taken into account the needs of every person in this region, we really have had to deal time and again with solutions that were tailored to benefit City Hall and the 2 airlines that control 80% of the operations at O'Hare. And I must say, Mr. Del Balzo, once upon a time, 15 years ago, we were fighting against the FAA as well. But the FAA has even stepped in now to cut operations.
So your question, Mr. Roebling, is?
Craig, don't you think we need a regional airport authority that is going to open all of the records about this issue and subject plans for the future to that kind of regional scrutiny so that our decisions can be made on that basis and not just for one airline or for one municipality?
Well, my fear is, if we start going
I think you have to come over here.
My fear is you start playing more political games. I'm not sure if we'll ever get this resolved. I think the solution exists today. I don't think you need another authority. The solution exists today in the fact that we know the South Suburban Airport is viable and should be built. Matter of fact, the city of Chicago supported the idea of a South Suburban Airport when it supported Lake Calumet 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Matter of fact, Mayor Daley pounded his fist on the podium saying, for the best interest of the entire region, we need a South Suburban Airport. Lake Calumet's the answer. So I think the solution's there. The problem is no one wants to do the solution. I don't fault Mayor Daley for what he's trying to do. He's trying to do it in the best interest of his constituents. But we have to look beyond what's best for our constituents. We have to look what's best for the region, because no community is an island unto itself. If you let a cancer grow nearby, it's going to spread to you eventually, and that's what's happening here. So I think a quick answer is the solution's there. We just need to implement it. And the hope is that there's enough pressure building. And as the facts come out, and as we make the FAA or work with the FAA to do their job, and the costs now are $6 billion are now $15 billion. The flight's not $1.6 million, it's now $1.2 billion or $1 million. As we make them put the information out publicly, then I think everyone's going to come to the same conclusion. Build the South Suburban Airport, modernize O'Hare, Western access at O'Hare, and do what's right for everybody involved. And I think that's the best way to get it resolved. You form more government entities, then you just start making more and more layers, and we're going to be fighting this battle for another 40 years. We don't need that. We need to act now and act quickly.
Yes, sir. Your name, please?
Tim Taylor. I'm a resident of Bensenville, actually in the southern runway, proposed southern runway area. And this is a question for Mr. Johnson. Let's see, as vice chair of the Suburban O'Hare Commission and president and
You have a question to direct to one of the panelists?
Mr. Johnson.
Okay.
It is to Mr. Johnson. As vice chair of the Suburban O'Hare Commission and mayor of the village of Elk Grove Village, could you please tell me how much money, tax dollars, has gone into the Suburban O'Hare Commission since its inception? Its offshoot projects such as the O'Hare Integrity Project, the South Suburban Airport Commission, the fees for Mr. Karaganis and his law office that does the legal work for the SLC in the village of Bensenville, Elk Grove Village, the surrounding towns. Basically, how much money has fighting O'Hare in trying to develop another airport cost the taxpayers of Bensenville, Elk Grove Village, and the surrounding towns?
The money we've spent as a community, I haven't been part of the community government for the past 20 years. I can tell you the 7 years I've been mayor, we have probably spent close to $3 million to $3.5 million, just Elk Grove Village. As far as Bensenville, probably close to the same, if maybe not a little bit more. Other towns have kicked in. The South Suburban Airport, we've put in approximately $2 million. That's Elk Grove, Park Ridge, and Bensenville, of which we'll recoup once the airport gets built and going. As far as the fees go, I can guarantee you, you'll never find them, but I will bet you your house that's maybe 1/1,000,000th of what Chicago has spent on their consultants, lawyers, and fees and studies and everything else. Yet, as we stand here today, we have been proven right, and more importantly, we're going to be right in the end of the day for the simple fact, and if you think about this is important. How is a town like Elk Grove Village in Bensenville being allowed to thwart the efforts of the most powerful mayor in the country, Mayor Daley, two of the most powerful businesses, United American Airlines, and some of the most powerful elected officials, Denny Hastert and others? Because we're right. If we weren't right, they would have steamrolled us years ago. But we have spent money, unfortunately, to the tune of millions of dollars, and we're going to continue to do so because we're fighting for our community's future. And more importantly, let me put something here too. Mr. Karaganis over there gets vilified, beaten up on a daily basis. Let me tell you this. If Chicago could get Mr. Karaganis to work for them, they would hire him in a heartbeat because we've never lost a case, and we've always been right, and he's a thorn in their side they can't get rid of. And my community, Bensenville, and everybody else says, God bless him, because without him on our side, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So they can say what they want, but also do me a favor. Find out how much Chicago spends. Find out how much they spend on their lawyers, their consultants. They say, well, these guys are paid consultants. Sure are. Everything Chicago puts out is by a paid consultant. But I'll tell you this. Put the reputation of these gentlemen online. And if you noticed, as they started doing the work, all of a sudden Chicago's numbers have changed. Because you got experts with impeccable credentials saying, you know what, it's not $6 billion, is it? Oh, Chicago says, no, you're right, it's close to $14.8 billion. They say, it's not 1.6 million operations. Oh, you're right, it's 1.2 million or something like that. If we don't put the pressure on them to do the job right and be honest and open, it's not going to happen. These guys have the reputations to stand up in the light of day. And that's why you're hearing things. The other thing we'll offer now today, I'll offer to the business community, join with us. Let's put all the facts on the table in a public light for business people, like I'm a businessman, you're business people. Put on the table today all the facts, all the numbers of O'Hare expansion. Put all the facts and all the numbers on public table of the South Suburban Airport. And let's judge what's the best plan. I'll tell you right now, on behalf of Bensenville and Elk Grove Village, if O'Hare expansion's judged in the public scrutiny with all the facts public best, we'll support it. If it's not judged best, and the South Suburban Airport's judged best, then let's all get together and judge that. As business people, you don't do everything without knowing all the facts. I hope not. I know in my business I better know the facts before I make a decision. Why can't we do the same thing on this airport? Why can't we lay everything out and let the best plan win? We'll abide by it. Let's see if the city of Chicago will do it.
Yes, sir. Your name, please?
Hi, my name is Rick Bryant. I work with Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr.'s office. The FAA recently within the last month, issued a study that looked at the low-cost airlines, and they concluded that about 25% of all passengers today, I think it was 27% actually, ride the low-cost carriers, the discount airlines. But within 10 years, that number is going to grow to 50%. So the number of passengers on low-cost carriers is going to double in the next 10 years. Low-cost carriers, in order to maintain their low-cost status, need to have flights, their per-passenger costs around $10 or less. And the figures you showed today that O'Hare will have per-passenger costs of anywhere from $20 to $28, I think he said, when they complete this project. Is building this, the O'Hare expansion, isn't that running counter to the economics of the aviation industry right now? I mean, if the 100% increase in low-cost carriers in the next 10 years, and they need $10 to get people on their plane, and we're building something that's going to cost $20 to $30 to get people on that plane, are we jeopardizing the very reputation of Chicago being the aviation hub of the country by going against all the market trends? One of the economists, I hope, can answer that question.
Comments? Yes. You have to come over here.
The answer is yes, and it's evident in the chart I showed you, just here in Chicago. Low-fare carriers, and let's take Midway as an example. The average ticket price at Midway is $90. The average ticket price at O'Hare is $141, domestic ticket. The low-fare carrier cannot pay more than roughly 9 or 10% of the ticket price in airport costs. That's about where he maxes out. Consequently, as they grow and grow, they're going to grow somewhere else. If they can't grow at Midway, they'll grow there as much as possible, and then they're going to find an alternative. They will not operate O'Hare under any kind of an OMP of the magnitude that we see and that I described to you. Just, they can't afford it. They can't get anywhere near $26 in terms of a facility cost burden.
Yes.
If I may, real quick, if you don't think this is reality, look what happened at St. Louis's airport. They just put a new runway in. If you're reading the articles out there, the operating cost per passenger is going to be $13 at the new expanded St. Louis airport. The airlines have told the airport, we're not going to pay that unless you fix it. The mayor of the city of St. Louis is now looking at passing a municipal tax to compensate the airport to get the price down to $10 a passenger, because the airlines aren't going to use it. They've told them that. So you're talking about what John's talking about. Could you imagine the kind of tax that would have to be passed on for the city of Chicago to get their airline costs down to $10 a passenger? And if that's not a local tax, I don't know what is a local tax. So just look at that if you want reality check on what's happening with costs for passengers and what it means to the airlines.
That's it. Thanks for coming.